Bonjour, bonsoir. Hello, everyone watching. I hope you just enjoyed the amazing film, ALICK and ALBERT. Directors and producers whom we have the pleasure of having tonight with us. Trish Lake, producer from Fresh Water and Freshwater Pictures, and Gilles Bézéraud, director of the Société des Explorations de Monaco. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's honestly a pleasure to have you talking about the film, such an impactful film that I watched myself only a week ago and have definitely been thinking a lot about it because it really attacks certain aspects of environment we necessarily don't think about when we talk about climate change. We sometimes, I think, tend to leave behind populations at risk, as well as their cultures, such as the ones represented in the film in ALICK and ALBERT. So I would like to start asking you a little bit about how this first approach to work with Badu Island started from Monaco. How was that first link made, and why?
Gilles, if you would like to speak from Monaco's perspective, I'd like to first of all say I'm the producer, and the director couldn't be with us for this particular chat. Well, look, I will start because I was the one in Australia who heard about an exhibition that was being staged in Monaco, and it was precisely around the ocean and the effects to the ocean of not just climate change, but, you know, the very modern world, and in particular, the pollution of the ocean with, with drift nets and with overfishing, coral degradation. And of course, it all roads lead to our population and the way we're managing the planet. So that's how I understood that this little place of Badu Island even existed, through being an Australian and hearing about it from Monaco. So perhaps, Gilles, this might be your opportunity to tell us why Monaco was interested in this exhibition to begin with.
Well, it's as you mentioned, the exhibition called Tabanaba was in the continuation of the wish of the Chief Executive Officer of the Oceanographic Institute, Prince Albert I of Monaco Foundation. On the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco is one component of the institute. And the CEO, Robert Calcagno, who became CEO in 2009, decided to give a new impulse to the combination of art and science, which was at the origin of the Oceanographic Museum. So he started a program of exhibitions. And because of his earlier connection with Australia, he was interested in displaying how the indigenous and insular population of Australia, both the continent and the islands around Australia, connected with the ocean and with the threats that impact the ocean, and through the ocean impacts their life. So that's what the idea behind the Tabanaba exhibitions is, to show how the artists from Australia related to the current situation in relation with climate change.
And I would like to know, because in the film it's showed in a very interesting way, which means we can see how at first there's Prince Albert that goes there. Sorry, there's ALICK that goes, and then there's Prince Albert that goes to Badu Island, and it's beautiful. I mean, I think we can appreciate it really bluntly from Prince Albert's interventions in the film, in the documentary, where he explains how for him is a beautiful and enriching experience to be living the life and living the interactions of locals in Badu Island. So I was wondering how these relations were established. I think there's obviously many missions going on in the world in at-risk places and at-risk cities. I know there's a lot of these projects going on in Latin America, for example, in Africa as well. But we can't read Badu Island. It's a population that, as they say in the film, there's a certain issue with Australia. At the same time, there's identity, let's say struggles, tensions sometimes as well. So how was this link made? Obviously through art, but how did you realize at a certain point that art could be a mean to bring these two populations and into work together through this problematic?
Well, let me just say that the exhibition opened my eyes to the link between art and science, which Jill mentioned. But beyond that, it was a call for help. The artists were all talking about the issues, so their art was reflecting their deep emotional connection to nature, but at the same time calling for us, everyone, to do more. So that is what struck me when I saw the exhibition. I'm a producer, but I also very much get involved in the creative inspiration for films. And so way before we even had a director for the film, I was already looking for a way to talk more about these issues that this exhibition had told me about, in a way, by seeing it. And so I then talked with a lot of artists until I came across ALICK. And when I found ALICK and knew he was one of the artists who had been featured at the exhibition, it seemed to me he had the perfect story to allow us into his world, but also to not make us feel bad about how we're living our lives, because that's the biggest problem, I think, is denial. You know, even for those who really believe that climate change is changing our lives dramatically, we feel very paralyzed about what we can do. And it felt to me like if we could have a film and a story that allowed people to watch it and feel hopeful, but at the same time learn so much about how they can be more involved themselves, easily involved, then that would be a film that would be worth making. So they're the films that I'm interested in making. And so, you know, from meeting ALICK, and then ALICK telling me that he'd had this conversation with the Prince, and then actually finding in the archive the moment that they met, and actually seeing a photograph where they actually looked like brothers, you know, friends, close friends at their first meeting. I think there's some chemistry there. So on our hunch, that's where the journey started to make the film.
That's lovely. I would love to know how, from the perspective of Monaco, well, as you were saying, the Institute already had a certain, artistic way of passing messages. You know, obviously the exposition was based on the art. But how do you find that bridge to send such a compelling message, not only through, you know, organizing the trip to Badu Island and organizing the trip to Monaco, but also to like be able to do the job you do, which is research, and then also be able to portray it in such, to collaborate into such a artistic project that's like a documentary?
Well, I would say this is all in the DNA of Monaco, and especially in the DNA of the Prince family, starting with his great-great-grandfather Albert I of Monaco, who initiated that process of recognizing art and science as the main strands of life. On his great-great-grandson, Prince Albert II, was very much along that same line, based on his own education through his father, based with, of course, Monaco is on the Mediterranean coast, so there's a very close connection between Monaco and the sea. based on his education, including his maritime, his naval education, because he spent some time on the French naval training ship in the early 1980s. And then he became personally very committed in the protection of the planet, protection of the environment, and especially protection of the ocean. He has traveled, he's a well-traveled prince. He's the only head of state who has visited both poles. So you could say it's a bipolar head of state in the real sense that he went to the North Pole and to the South Pole. And he has also traveled, he knows very well the Pacific, he knows very well Oceania, which, I mean, the name itself is interesting. It means that the people that live there consider the ocean are their country. So it's important for them that the health of the ocean is very important for them. So this connection through the prince is the driver of all this, including the work that we are doing through Monaco Explorations.
It is true that what you said, it can definitely be perceived in film. I particularly loved that part where Prince Albert is meeting only with women, and they discuss the role of women in environment and how there's this connection, obviously, the whole Mother Nature thing and the woman as the role that you can tell they obviously play in the community, but also this particular role with the protection of nature, especially because we can see previously that the fishing activities are very much linked to masculine population. So that is really interesting, and I would like to know how you. I think it's more a question probably for Trish. How did you? I want to know if you decided to include that perspective into the film on purpose, or if it was just something that came out naturally because of how the community is configured in Badu Island.
Well, I think that it was intentional. It's also because of my own background. I'm a woman, and I was very interested to know about, essentially the patriarchy exists on Badu Island as much as it does, on the rest of the planet. It's a different way it exists, but it was clear that to not investigate that as part of the story would be leaving out a big part of the story. I think it's very interesting. You say that, I mean, in terms of fishing, actually the women are very good fishers. We did see one of the women looking for crabs, for example, when we first meet her. I think what's interesting is everything's changing. And I think it's not just about the past. It's not just saying culture and the way we lived our lives in the past is the only way to live. It's not about going backwards. It's about taking the best of what we have and then integrating it with the best of what we have coming. And I think, interestingly enough, that is what art and science intersection is about, because art represents the way our culture is, the way we have traditionally and historically lived our lives in a way. But art is also about the future, and science is about the technology that cannot be conflicting with art and culture. So subtly, I mean, it's a very simple little film, but there's so much to unpack. And I felt like by being with the women who actually, in many ways, were responsible for the mission even happening, because it was the voices of the women in the various meetings we had before we even were able to film in Badu, who actually gave the green light because they felt this connection to Monaco through Princess Grace in a strange kind of way. Their connection to Monaco, which had come through culture, through the screen, and was the modern culture, not their historical culture, was how they knew Monaco. And then, of course, the way that the prince had his effect on being a visitor, I think allowed for some of the stronger voices of the women to say, yes, we need to have a stronger voice in our future. And hence the way the women now are collecting around the ideas of, investigating more about what they can do to from the community's point of view, to just look at basic things such as recycling, which is, until recently was not happening on Bardu Island.
It's, that you can definitely see that as well. And the whole piece, or the whole part where they talk about Grace Kelly and how they were put up to tears when they talked about Grace Kelly, was definitely very touching. I would like to ask Jill, what were your expectations like building the project, and then how did that kind of change when you arrived there, and how did the culture impact that can only be sensed when you're in the field changed, or maybe impacted, obviously in a positive or negative way, the perspective you had for the project?
Well, I don't think we're so much surprised because that's something we are familiar with through the various trips that were made, that happened before in this area of the planet. I think that we are very familiar with the type of approach that Trish mentioned on the relation between tradition, not looking at the past, but building on tradition to go toward a better future. That's something that is very important in all the Pacific, in all the Southwest Pacific. And I've been in different islands in Southwest Pacific, and it's the same everywhere. It's interesting to have this culture that we find in islands which are so far apart, but that relate to the same origin and to the same principles. So it's not really a surprise.
And how did the project evolve once you were there, even though you already had been there? Was there something that you thought was a contribution that you were probably not expecting, or because when you obviously add the artistic side to it, there's a different approach than the scientific one? It's what I mean.
Well, I mean, it helps to explain the importance of things. I mean, the way, for instance, just taking one example, the way ALICK in his art display turtles, for instance, on the big display that was on the roof of the Oceanographic Museum is very touching, and so people relate to the significance of marine turtles, on the importance of making sure that we are not impacting too much on their way of life through drift nets that Trish Lake mentioned earlier, or through plastic pollution. So, and that's related again to the efforts that Monaco has been driving over the years, fighting against plastic pollutions, developing marine protected areas, and that's something that we are looking into in the Southwest Pacific, because again, in relation with the overall objective of protecting 30% of the surface of the planet, including 30% of the surface of the ocean by 2030, requires a lot of work, because it's not only defining areas that are going to be protected, it's also putting into place effective protective measures. So that's, and then there's of course also some other specific issues that also in which Monaco has been very active, related with the impact of climate change on corals, which is of course a very important issue in the Pacific, especially around Australia, but also around other islands like New Caledonia or elsewhere. And again, Monaco was a driver of an international initiative for protecting coral reef. And again, that's a way to relate directly to what has been seen on Badu and in other islands in the area.
I think I was going to ask you about that a bit later. But first of all, I wanted to ask you about how does the making of this film impacted the place that art already had in your institute? I mean, obviously it's a museum, so there's always the mere exposition. It definitely opens place for artistic expression, but this film definitely, I think, brings arts into the table, and in a different way that we may obviously perceive it in Europe, right? So I would like to know if there was an impact on the way of perceiving certain things inside of the in the museum.
Well, I think it's reinforced the feeling that it's important to make people approaching art and science together and not separately. I mean, for some people, when you talk about museum, you're talking about dusty places which are not interesting and do not relate to real life. And that's something that we need to change in terms of perception. And I think the Oceanographic Museum, in that respect, has made a lot of progress over the years to push away the dust and make the items that are displayed in the museum relating to the current issues. So that's something important. And on the exhibitions such as Tabanaba and the exhibitions that have followed, including the current one, which was started a few days ago, a few weeks ago, which is related to another area of the world with a different approach, but it's also a combination of putting art in the middle of the museum. And this the current exhibition relates to the North Sea, which is a totally different area, but similar approach. That the one that was used for Tabanaba on the previous exhibitions.
Can I just say that, I work in film. Film is the art that I see, my world, that it's very heavily influenced by film. And for me, film, and particularly cinema, is about emotion. And I think what was very clear that this museum understands more than many, many scientific institutions that I have come across is just what Robert, who is the director who was featured in the film, he talks about how art is a door into another world. And I think in this case, the film makes it very clear that if we don't have an emotional connection to what is going on, then, our lives are just not going to be as powerful in order to make change. So for me, one of the great parts of this film is feeling. I think the film absolutely allows the audience to feel what we're talking about. And I think that that's something that the museum is doing as well, is understanding that the connection that humans will have to our future has to come through not just science, but the emotion that you can find through art. So I think that is a very powerful emotion and so necessary. And because we kind of stop feeling, I think we're in a problem. That's where the world is right now. But you go to a place like Bardu Island and everything is instinctive. They know the way the wind is blowing. They know the way that the sun is affecting their lives. We are just in denial. And part of that is because our emotions are being shut down. So I say, yes, cinema, the way the museum is operating, individual stories, art itself is the way that we can find that door to a future.
It advocates a lot of things, what you've both have been saying, because as you know, the festival, it's very involved. It's exactly that mix between political issues and art. And obviously we believe firmly in that the messages we need to communicate to change what is harassing us as a species can be done through cinema. And it's been astonishing for me because I've been interviewing 3 different directors and 3 different producers this week, and they all agreed in terms of we've been trying to be convinced as societies that we need to change through facts for the last 80 years. And we're not convinced by facts. We're convinced by emotion. And I think that, as Trish was saying, we the film encapsulates perfectly all of these things. And there's, as you said, is a simple films and you know, quote unquote, but there's a lot to unpack. And one of the things that for me is really well communicated is the link between everything. You have the images of Badu Island. Everything is very, you know, simple in certain ways. You can see the simplicity of the community, but at the same time, the complexity of the interactions. But then you have Monaco, and it's completely different. You have the family visiting Monaco. So I guess my question is, well, I would like a comment on one of the phrases that really touched me from the film. That is, it's at the very end. I think Alex says, "From one shore to the other, we're connected by the sea." And I think it captivates perfectly the union between what you both do individually, Trish as a producer and Gilles in the museum. So my question is, are you planning to continue communicating this message through this medium? Like, I think it would be super enriching that other institutions in the world put themselves to communicating in this way. And I think Monaco is playing a huge role. I think Alec himself in the film says that he felt really involved in the conversations that were being had about coral reefs. And yeah, like, is it going to keep being nourished? I think everyone that watched the film at the end of the film is craving more of this kind of cooperation and synergies.
Well, I am in touch with, obviously, Monaco constantly, but also the Australian Institute of Marine Science, which is the official government institution in Australia. And let's not, you know, let's not be coy. The Australian government has a very bad track record on climate change. So it's ironic that their major marine institution has cooperated with this film, because behind the scenes they're doing amazing work. I think the possibility of further work, which began as part of this film, but to some extent has had a bit of a hold placed on it because of the pandemic. I'd like to see that cooperation and further exploration happen sooner rather than later, because I know that the people of the Torres Strait are very, very concerned about how the Australian government is not caring enough about their situation. And if it's Monaco that comes to be one of the organisations that can make the Australian government become more aware and do more, then that is fantastic. So I think, yes, this film is playing a very important role. But I know Gilles has got lots of other missions on as well, but I do hope to see sooner rather than later, and perhaps an opportunity for more filming to show this incredible cooperation that is happening or could happen.
Yes, it is in our plans. As Tris mentioned, we worked with AIMS, the Australian Institute of Marine Science, as shown in the film already. We've continued to discuss with them, and then, of course, the pandemic stopped everything because, as you know, Australia has been locked down until very, very recently. Trish Lake was not able to come to the avant-premiere of the film that took place in Saint-Tropez in October last year, and that she was very sorry for that. And we were very sorry that she couldn't be with us, and that ALICK couldn't be with Prince Albert for that avant-premiere. And then, of course, life is continuing, is going on. So, of course, our current priorities are elsewhere. We are planning an expedition in the Indian Ocean later this year, followed by another one in the Mediterranean. But we have developed a 10-year plan in relation with the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, on going back to the Southwest Pacific on developing a plan, a new expedition with AIMS and other institutes in the region, because we are looking at a regional approach, including Australia, but also the countries around Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and so forth. It is in our plans, and we do intend to do it within the next 10 years.
And can I also say that the film itself is doing good work because, for example, every week it's playing at different festivals, but in particular it is going to be traveling around all of the many islands of the Torres Strait with community screenings. The director, Douglas Watkin, and ALICK himself are very much involved in making sure that the film is reaching as many people from the Torres Strait, because, and not only the Torres Strait, I mean, mainland Australia knows very little about these islands, even though it's part of Australia. So the festivals that the film is appearing in for example, next week it's going to be in Albany, which is in the southwest corner of Australia. Audiences there will hear from the director who is going to be there with the film. And I think it's so fantastic that Australians themselves can have their eyes open to what is happening, you know, within their own country that they were completely unaware about. So, you know, the film is doing good work. Science is, the facts are always going to be the most important thing. But if people don't listen to the facts, we have to tap their emotions to be able to allow them to be open to it.
Yeah, that is true. It's really interesting about how in Australia itself, it's probably an unknown topic or not too discussed. I wanted to ask you how, this is one of my last questions, how was the film received? Because obviously you both receive feedback from very different sources. So I'd like to know how it was received for Monaco in terms of like, there's several institutes in Europe that work conservation of the oceans, etc. But I'm sure not all of them do films and do this kind of, let's say, touching work. So I would like to know in that sense how it was received inside of House of Monaco. And the same for Trish and for the producer. Like, is this something you, in the lines of what you've been doing, is this something that you will try to continue using, you know, to pass all of the messages you were discussing about, like, your background as a woman, as a person interested in nature and in climate, as we all should be?
Jill, you go first.
Well, I think the film has been is not yet commercially available in Europe, so there has been a limited audience so far, unfortunately. But that limited audience has been has received the film very well. I think all the things that Trish explained earlier are felt by the audience. I mean, this film is touching. This film relates directly to human beings. So it's. I think it's. I mean, I have myself watched it a number of times, and every time I feel the same thing. I mean, in spite of the repetition. Because I guess it's a success of the team that did the film, Trish Lake and Douglas Watkin, and of course the two main actors, ALICK and Prince Albert, that I think are excellent in that movie to make people feel that it's real life, it's real feelings, it's reality, and it relates to things on which we can act if we understand the issues. And the film is going to continue to be shown, and including in political arenas. We are planning currently a screening at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon in June, The film was shown last week in the Philadelphia Environmental Film Festival in the US. So I mean, it's going on.
Amazing.
Well, look, I think with films, this film is many years in the making, and it will be many years in the way it's releasing. So it's already had a theatrical release in Australia. It's very difficult for cinema at the moment, as we all know. But every screening I went to, and I went to many of the screenings, the experience that people have of the film is a very positive one, and it doesn't feel like it's despairing. It feels like something that people can laugh with, and they can feel very affected by. And so I've seen and spoken to audiences, and I'm very pleased that that's the way they're feeling the film. It's got many more screenings to happen in public community gatherings in Australia as well as cinema, but it's already on a platform in Australia called Stan, which is like an Australian Netflix, very similar platform in terms of the audience cut through in Australia, and we're getting very positive feedback. Unfortunately, we've just, we've tried very hard to get it onto the Netflix platform globally. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet, because the film is not about, we want to return money to the investors, but it's not about just getting the very best financial deal. It's really about getting the very best number of eyeballs on this film. So we're very pleased that festivals such as yourselves and many others are showing such interest in the film, and we're getting such good feedback and invitations. But in my ideal world, I would like us to be able to get it out there as broadly as possible, and for people to hear about that it's a positive experience to see it, that it's not hard work, that it's actually a fun and interesting film, and that the complexity is in the layers that you feel over the week or so after you see the film. I've had many people tell me that there are so many things they keep remembering about the film, and so that complexity is there, but it's an easy watch.
It is. It's exactly it. I was very linked to what you just said. It was my last question. Sometimes when we approach this kind of topics, we have several environment-related films in the festival. And truth be told, most of them, I would say, approach the issue with it leaves a very catastrophic feeling and kind of despair, as you were saying, right? And our biggest audience, I would say, is young people, because we have awards that are accorded, that are given by young students, by students from primary school to university. So my last question would be how to continue delivering these messages without inspiring despair, but at the same time encouraging action from both your completely different fields of action, being, Monaco and the government of Monaco, and as a film producer.
Well, from a film producer's point of view, I look, I'm feeling like everybody else, relatively helpless. But at the same time, I'm inspired by so much great work that's happening around me. So as a filmmaker, there are many, many stories, and I look for the ones that are going to connect most strongly with audiences. There's several films that I am involved with ongoing as an executive producer. And while I'm still getting this film out there to the world, probably the strongest film that I feel very hopeful about is one called Flyways, which is about migratory shorebirds, for example. And interestingly enough, the people in the film of ALICK and ALBERT talked about migratory shorebirds and how important they are as a litmus to be able to tell us about the health of the flyways of the world, where migratory birds are really, really suffering. But at the same time, they are such incredible creatures that they can just inspire us for what they do. So I will continue looking for more films, more stories, but finding the way of telling those stories that can be so impactful on an audience that they don't need to just feel catastrophe. They can also feel wonder and awe, and then hopefully, you know, continue to work as a producer who has that responsibility to show everything that is great and everything that needs protection for the future.
Thank you so much. Jill?
Well, I would say in simple terms, continue doing much of the same, because I mean, this film is a very good example of how you can keep things simple at the human level, but impactful all the same. And I think that's a model that we need which should continue to inspire us on how we explain things, because of course we need to know better, we need to explain better, and then people will relate more easily to the reality and to the action that they need to take at individual level as well as the collective level to make sure that tomorrow is better than if we do nothing.
Completely. Well, thank you so much for tonight. It was a pleasure having you both. It was very enriching for me personally, as I'm sure it was for everyone watching. And let's keep on track on ALICK and Albert to see where it goes. Especially, hopefully we'll continue going very far.
Thank you.
Thank you.